we found that alum-treated litter, that the yields of the tall fescue were 28% higher than just regular poultry litter. And I'm like, how can this be? And so we started analyzing the plants, and there was a lot more nitrogen in those plants getting alum-treated litter. And so I thought, somehow we've affected the nitrogen cycle. And the most likely way that I could think of was we reduced ammonia volatilization.
Hello, folks. This is Dr. Phil Stair with Wisenetics, Poultry Podcast. And we get to introduce to you Dr. Philip Moore, the USDA RS up in Arkansas. So, Philip, if you would go ahead and tell about yourself.
Good morning. I'm a soil scientist with USDA Agriculture Research Service here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I do research on, I'm part of the Poultry Production and Product Safety Research Unit, and do research on phosphorus runoff from poultry litter and ammonia emissions, and trying to reduce both of those.
Well, maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself. I saw that you've been educated in Arkansas, Louisiana, and started out, looked like, in soil science, and then you made a journey into marine science.
Yes, I got my BS degree in soil science here at Fayetteville, University of Arkansas, master's in agronomy, and I worked on nitrogen uptake by rice. It's one of our big crops here. Then I went to LSU, and my PhD was actually in marine sciences. I could have done agronomy under my major professor, but at that time, the agronomy program wasn't very strong at LSU, and the marine science program was really strong. And so my major professor had me get a PhD in marine science. During that time, I was fortunate to get a Fulbright scholarship to go to Thailand and worked on acid sulfate soils in Thailand and looked at rice production. And then once I graduated, I went to University of Florida at Gainesville and studied nutrient cycling in lakes, mainly phosphorus cycling at lakes, and looking at phosphorus geochemistry and what controls phosphorus in lakes. And then I came back to Arkansas. At first, for a couple of years, I was a rice specialist at the Southeastern Research and Extension Center, which is in Monticello. And then in 1992, I got this position with ARS in Fayetteville.
And so your charge up there has been working with the poultry industry, sounds like. So it took you from plants to animals.
That's right.
Save the date. Join the Poultry Science Association for the 2026 PSA annual meeting happening July 10th to 13th, 2026. Experience the forefront of poultry science at this dynamic conference featuring cutting-edge research and innovation from industry leaders and academic experts. It's your opportunity to connect, learn, and help shape the future of poultry science. Mark your calendar and stay tuned for more at poultryscience.org.
So tell us some of the early work you did. You were fundamental in getting some of this, some of the nitrogen fixation in poultry houses. You want to tell us some about that?
Yeah. Actually, before I got the job, I heard that it was a new position open, and my wife and I were both wanting to move back to Fayetteville. And I said, "What is the job?" I was talking to an old friend, and he said, "Well, there's too much phosphorus runoff from poultry litter," and at the time, I was working in the rice fields, and there was very low levels of phosphorus in those fields. And what was there was tied up as aluminum, calcium, or iron minerals. And I said, "Well, that's easy. You just add aluminum, calcium, iron to the poultry litter, and you tie it up." And they said, "Well, it's not that simple, Philip." And I thought, well, it should be. When I was at Florida looking at geochemistry in lakes, one of the things I studied was adding alum to lakes. People do that to flocculate out all the algae and tie up the phosphorus. And so I did what I call a quick and dirty study. I went to the lab and see what kind of aluminum compounds we had. We had aluminum sulfate, which is alum, aluminum chloride. We had all kinds of iron products, ferric and ferrous sulfates and chlorides, and then a bunch of different calcium products, calcium sulfate, which is gypsum. We had all kinds of limes, calcium oxide, calcium hydroxide, and of course, calcium carbonate, regular limestone, dolomitic limestone. And so we did just mix those with poultry litter and incubate them for like a week to see if any of those would reduce soluble phosphorus in the poultry litter. And all of them worked. We had like 100 different treatments. Everything worked. Some of them worked better, obviously, than others. The soluble phosphorus without any treatment was like 2,000 parts per million. And a lot of these treatments would drop it down to just several parts per million. So it worked really good. I did that just so I'd have something to interview with on my job, and ended up getting the job. And when I got here, there was two people, Dwayne Edwards and Tommy Daniel, that were doing runoff studies with poultry litter. And they had these rainfall simulators and small plots, exactly for the simulators. So I was kind of able to hit the ground running. I said, let's put out some litter and treat some of it with alum, which is aluminum sulfate, and treat some of it with iron. We were looking at ferric sulfate, and see if we can get some reduction in phosphorus runoff. And so we did that. We did the rainfall studies. And with alum, we reduced phosphorus runoff by 87%. And I was like, wow, that's a lot. And I was worried that adding all that aluminum to the litter somehow would reduce crop growth, because I had worked in Thailand on acid sulfate soils. And in those soils, you have really acid conditions, and you get aluminum toxicity in rice. And so I didn't want that to happen with our forages. And so we were measuring yields. And when we did that, we found that alum-treated litter, that the yields of the tall fescue were 28% higher than just regular poultry litter. And I'm like, how can this be? And so we started analyzing the plants, and there was a lot more nitrogen in those plants getting alum-treated litter. And so I thought, somehow we've affected the nitrogen cycle. And the most likely way that I could think of was we reduced ammonia volatilization. When I was in high school, I worked a little bit in chicken houses back when they had the old trough waters, and I would clean out the waters, and I'm picking up dead birds and stuff like that, kind of grunt labor. But I remembered the ammonia would be really high in these houses. Sometimes it'd burn your eyes or even your lungs if it's really high. And so, I'm a soil scientist, so I knew nothing about poultry production when I was first hired. So I go to my boss, Dr. Bill Huff. He was our research leader here. And I said, Bill, does this ammonia in chicken houses ever cause any problems? Would it be good if we reduced ammonia in chicken houses? And he just started laughing, and probably wondering about it. This guy he hired as a soil scientist knows nothing about poultry. And he said, yeah, it causes a lot of problems. He says, that ammonia affects their appetite, so their weight gains are lower. And then the big thing is it affects their feed conversion, how much feed, corn and soybeans, it takes to make a pound of chicken. He said it rips up their mucous membranes and everything, and it paralyzes the cilia, and that makes them more susceptible to diseases. He said as far back as the 1960s, people were doing research where they showed under relatively low ammonia conditions, like 20 parts per million, when they sprayed Newcastle disease viruses in houses with ammonia and no ammonia. Those with ammonia got Newcastle far quicker, so it makes them more susceptible to viral diseases. And of course, right now that's important because we have avian influenza in this country, and so he said, in fact, people sell stuff to reduce ammonia in chicken houses. And I said, okay. And so I went back to the lab, and I thought we need to figure out if any of these treatments we're using reduce ammonia. So I got all of the different aluminum, calcium, and iron compounds back out. And then I got some of the products they were selling on the market. And I didn't have any. I just got here. I didn't have any good equipment in the lab. So we made little Tupperware containers and passed gas through there. And we took all the ammonia out before it went into these little chambers. And we caught the ammonia and boric acid traps. And we found when we added alum at a fairly high rate, it totally reduced ammonia volatilization like 99% over 6 weeks. It won't do that in a chicken house, but this was a lab study. And it worked better than anything else we tried, better than the iron compounds. The calcium compounds, most of those didn't work, or they increased it. If you increase the pH, it increased volatilization. and it actually worked better than the commercial products applied at their recommended rates. And so at that point, I thought, I might ought to apply for patents for some of this. It may be important. So we started down that road. But then I went to the Arkansas Soil and Water Conservation Commission and gave them a little talk on this. And there was a guy running it then named Randy Young. He was a great guy. And he said, this is the kind of stuff we need to be funding. And so he got me funding through EPA and their unit to test putting alum in commercial houses. And we worked with two different integrators, and they were both really great, and two different growers. And at these poultry farms, half of the houses we were treating with alum, and the other half were controls. And the integrators were so good, they agreed to get us feed conversion on each individual house and all the weight gains and condemnation and everything of the birds. And we were looking at mortality and everything. And then I had electric, each house had its own electric meter, and each house had its own propane tank. So we were able to measure electricity and propane. And we did those studies for a year, all the different flocks. And it was amazing. The ammonia would be so low in the alum-treated houses and pretty high in the control houses, and that benefited the birds. The weight gains were better. The big thing was the feed conversion. It was the overall average feed conversion in the alum-treated houses was 6 points better than the control houses, and that's worth a lot of money. And then the condemnation was better. When you have high ammonia in that litter and those chickens are on it, it makes breast blisters. And so there was less condemnation in the alum-treated houses, and there was less mortality. The surprising thing to me was the propane. Alum-treated houses use less propane because in the wintertime, they didn't have to ventilate as much during cooler parts of the year. And so we did just a simple economic analysis of that, where we looked at how much it cost to put the alum in. It ended up with transportation of the alum and application. It was about $480 per house. And then we looked at all of these benefits that we got from that. And it was the benefits worked out with feed conversion. And we did those to the integrator and to the grower. And some of those, we couldn't figure out what the benefit would be, like how much is better feed conversion worth to the grower? Well, that varies so much. I didn't want to put a number there because somebody could shoot at it, if it's a bad number. So some of those I just left as zero, even though there's obviously an economic value. And we got $940 per house on the sum of those benefits. And that includes propane and everything. And so if you look at the benefit cost ratio of that, it's about 1.96, so it's very cost effective. There's another way you can look at that. If you look at the net benefit, subtract the cost from those benefits, it was about $460 per house. And so there's about 20,000 birds in those houses at the time. And so the net benefit per bird was like 2.3 cents or something, a little over 2 cents a bird. And, to consumers buying chickens and everything, that's nothing, Philip, 2 cents a bird. But to the poultry industry, 2 cents a bird is actually a lot, because when they're growing millions and millions of birds, that actually adds up. And so it really took off after that. We got our patents and everything, and we licensed those patents. General Chemical was in New Jersey, and they're the biggest, or were the biggest alum manufacturer in the country. They got bought out in the last few years, but and they started selling alum to poultry producers. One of my best days at work was about 2000. They've been selling alum for a while, and they have this meeting every year in Atlanta. It's an international poultry exposition, And I was walking around looking at different things there. And I saw this guy he was a complex manager at Berryville, Arkansas, one of these big poultry complexes. And he's like, "Hey, Philip," and he came over, started talking. He said, "You remember you gave us a talk at Berryville about your alum research?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Well, I didn't think too much of it at the time." And I was kind of going, wonder where this conversation's going. He said, "But we decided to try it." He said, "We had a few growers that were really working hard, seemed to be doing everything right, but they would be ranked the lowest on the complex every flock. And so we put alum in their chicken houses. And they flip-flop from being on the bottom of the list to the top of the list. And we did that with the bottom 10% of the growers, and they flip-flop to the top 10%. And then the bottom 25% and the top, they went to the top 25%. And so he said, "You know what?" I said, "What?" He said, "Now we put alum in all of our chicken houses, and I have the lowest live production costs for any of the complexes in my company." And he was in a very big company. And so I was like, "Man, that's fantastic." I said, "I need to get you on the circuit with me, because at the time I was getting invited to talk all over the country, and in fact, Europe, different places, about the alum research." And he just kind of grinned. He said, "Well, Philip, the poultry industry is kind of competitive. And when we figure out an advantage like that, we like to keep it under our hats." And so that made the transfer of that technology take a little bit longer, than I thought it should have. The benefits were so good. I thought everybody should start using it immediately, but that didn't really happen. And part of the reasons for that is the poultry industry has been bombarded with all kinds of treatments. People claim that, this foo-foo dust will reduce ammonia or do this or that. And so they had a healthy skepticism of things like alum.
Well, let me ask you, what year was that? Because the numbers you're talking about, I think could be with some compounded interest by now, probably more value than it used to be back when you did the work.
Oh, those numbers were in the 90s. When I published that economic analysis in 98. And so the price of alum is much, much higher. But then the price of corn and soybeans is a lot higher now, and the price of poultry is a lot higher. So, yeah, those numbers are all from the 90s.
I think in this century now, Philip, that uptake has been much more generous. I think almost every producer that I know of that I've worked with is doing litter amendment of some sort, and alum is part of that.
Right.
I guess one of the questions on technology is the speed at which alum works. It does require moisture, does it not, to activate?
That's right. And when you have really dry conditions, it takes longer to activate than some of the other products. But, the other side of that coin is it usually lasts longer, too. It takes longer to activate and lasts longer. One of my other patents is mixing alum with sodium bisulfate. And sodium bisulfate will activate really quickly. It really sucks the moisture out of the air, but then I don't think it lasts as long. And so when you have them combined, you get the quick activation and longer lasting benefits.
That's the next question I was going to ask you, is I've had experience with the various products as a user or more an observer of people using it, and have seen success really with all the litter amendments, but it's exactly what you said. Each has their forte. And, alum does persist, I think, the longest of the products that are out there. But then, if you don't have the moisture, and if folks are mining their house moisture, they may not have the moisture to activate it until it's into the grow out, when the temperatures are actually being reduced, when you say the benefits on energy savings early on when the higher brooding temperatures. So do you have in your mind a comparison, the blended product versus the straight alum, application rates, that's varied too, how much do people need?
Well, when we looked at this, there's other products of alum that are liquids. And there's a lot of liquid alums, and you have to be pretty close to where they're making that liquid alum because the shipping goes up because you're shipping a liquid. But if I had really dry litter, flock after flock, then I would want to use probably the liquid products, liquid alum rather than the dry alum, or possibly this product where you've got sodium bisulfate mixed with alum. One of the things I've done for the 30 years is try to find a byproduct or waste product to use as a litter amendment. And I looked at all different kinds of things over the years, and I would get excited about a new waste product, and we'd analyze it, and it'd be loaded with arsenic or cadmium, or mercury or something really bad. And so I'd say, well, we can't use that because I don't want to cause a worse problem than what we had. And then I started looking at alum mud. And there's a couple of different ways to make alum, but one of the ways they make alum is they have these huge reactors, and they put tons of bauxite in there. And then they put sulfuric acid in there, and they stir that for like days. And then they let it settle out. And remarkably, the liquid on top is 48% liquid alum. It's real pure. I don't know how that works, but that's how they make it. And then they suck that liquid off and either sell it as liquid alum, or they can dry it and make dry alum. Well, the stuff left over is called alum mud. And, I've heard there's some places in the old days where they just threw it out in the back, and there's like acres and acres of this stuff. I can't do that nowadays. Of course, it goes into a landfill, and it costs like $30 a ton to put it in the landfill. Well, we decided to look at that. There's a lot of aluminum in that, and it's acidic. And I thought maybe we can make this into an amendment. But there's not enough acid there. And so when you hit it with like sulfuric acid, it just gets into this muddy mess. I mean, it's nothing anybody would want to use. I'm like, well, that doesn't work. And I was thinking, what else do they have at these plants that make this? And the other thing, they have bauxite there. So we tried mixing this alum mud with a little bauxite and then hitting it with sulfuric acid. And when you get just the right ratio, there's this exothermic reaction. It bubbles up and it's giving off gas and everything. And then it just completely dries up and cracks. And it's this real friable mixture. And we tested that in the lab at first. And it reduced ammonia volatilization and soluble phosphorus as much as alum. And I was like, oh, wow. And so then we went to pen trials where we grew chickens on it, and we measured fluxes of ammonia from the manure and soluble phosphorus, and we did phosphorus runoff studies, and it reduced ammonia volatilization and soluble phosphorus as much as alum did. And so we patented that too. And I'm getting excited. I think there's a company that's going to start selling that, probably be this year. And so that'll be interesting to see how that goes. But you would think they could sell it cheaper than alum since most of it is a byproduct. But that doesn't always happen. It's
right,
sometimes
right.
It's what the market will bear, the price is. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
This is exciting news, and exactly what Poultry Podcast interviews folks like yourself, Philip, to hear the updates. And so this is really good. So the folks at Wisenetics appreciate your updates and anything else you're working on. You've worked on this byproduct with alum mud.
Well, yeah, I'm working on nanoparticles. It was interesting. Last few years, we would sometimes be doing a little quick and dirty studies, and we would go get some chicken litter from a commercial house and be adding alum or this alum mud product or whatever, and we wouldn't get a reduction in soluble phosphorus. And in some cases, we got increases. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? Are you sure you labeled this right and everything? And, was there not a mistake somewhere? And then redo the experiment and get the same thing. And so I said, had they treated the house with anything? And a lot of times they said, well, they treated with sodium bisulfate for ammonia control. And so at the University of Arkansas poultry facilities, they have some broiler houses, commercial broiler houses, where they had treated with sodium bisulfate for like 10 flocks in a row. And so I got some of that litter, and I knew what it had been treated with. And I did that where we added alum, and it actually increased soluble phosphorus. Never before had seen this kind of thing. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? And so I got some litter that we had developed from pen trials and everything, control litter, nothing had been treated. And, treated with alum, got the good reduction in soluble P, 70% reduction or whatever. And then we treated it with sodium bisulfate and treated it with alum and got this increase. And what is happening, I think, is this chemical is formed called sodium aluminate. It's a mineral that forms in some acid soils that have sodium and have a lot of soluble aluminum and sulfate. And when it does that, the aluminum doesn't become aluminum hydroxide, which normally forms, and that's like a sponge for phosphorus. But the thing is, when you acidify a litter and you don't have some kind of aluminum, iron, or calcium compound, it increases soluble phosphorus because poultry litter has a lot of calcium phosphate in it. And when you add acid to that, when the pH gets below 7 on that solubilizes, it dissolves. And so that's what was happening. Well, so we figured this out. So then I heard people were using these nanoparticles. One company was using calcium silicate nanoparticles. Another were using aluminum dope magnetic nanoparticles in poultry processing plants for the wastewater, to clean up the phosphorus. And they were saying it worked better than alum or ferric chloride or whatever for cleaning up the phosphorus. And I thought, well, I should try some of that. And so, again, we started back in the lab doing those quick and dirty studies again, trying all these different nanoparticles. We tried them alone at first, and none of them did very good, except for this calcium silicate. It would reduce soluble phosphorus pretty good. But as a litter amendment, it really wasn't going to work because it was calcium-based and had high pH. So that's not going to reduce ammonia volatilization. You need an acid. So I thought maybe if we add it with these ammonia control chemicals like alum or sodium bisulfate, it would reduce the soluble phosphorus and would still have the ammonia reduction. And there was this synergistic effect. And it was amazing when we added it with like sodium bisulfate, it just really reduced the soluble phosphorus. Or alum really reduced the soluble phosphorus of that. And so I patented that. But things that work in the lab, as you well know, don't always work in the real world. And so we went and we did pen trials. We just finished those recently. And it just didn't quite work out the same in the pen. We got the reduction, but not the orders of magnitude reduction we had seen in the lab. And so we're trying to figure out what's going on there. And, hopefully we can figure it out. It just may not work. It's one of those things. If I'm a big believer in the 3 E's of sustainability, and the big one is economics. And so something has got to be economically sustainable to be a good best management practice.
That's definitely necessary, as you say, when you're working with farmers and agriculture, to think about keeping folks in business. Economics, they got to be able to live. And I think some folks sometimes outside of agriculture don't recognize that. But and it's good to hear, the USDA RS, the research arm, talk about governmental help. Well, you all actually do help, and it's nice to have folks like yourself working on these projects. And this is definitely of interest. And I think particularly, we hear about the litigation going on in Oklahoma. Some of the next door neighbor stuff that you all have there in Arkansas. Your area of research is very much needed and very much appreciated. And so I know you have a long list of citations, and folks can look you up and find a lot of your work that's been done. And then some of this current work is yet to be published. Is that correct? This work you're talking about?
Right. Yeah. There are publications in the pipeline right now. That nanoparticle paper I've just sent out to reviewers, in-house reviewers. And so we're fixing to submit that probably to Journal of Environmental Quality to get that. The scrubber paper, I just got a good paper published on our ammonia scrubber in the Journal of Applied Poultry Science. So that's research, yeah.
Oh, yeah, chapter. Yeah, very good. I was going to say, because that's where the poultry folks will be looking more so than some of the environmental journals, but
right.
Definitely good. Yeah, good to know. You have anything you're presenting in January at IPSF, or you have upcoming presentations to scientific meetings?
I am not. One of the problems right now, it's very difficult for us to travel. Our USDA has pretty much put a hold on travel for us to go give talks and stuff like that right now.
Philip, it has been a joy to hear what you've been working on, and I think we're about running out of time on our podcast here.
Okay.
So, Poultry Podcast, they like to be quick, and I think, is there something else that you'd like to share with the group before we finalize?
Well, I would like to talk a little bit about our indoor air scrubber.
Good.
We've developed this scrubber that purifies the air inside of chicken houses. I've been working on scrubbers for about 20 years and been looking at the exhaust air. And they have these huge scrubbers over in Europe that cost like $300,000 that scrub the exhaust air, and you don't really get any benefit there. You capture nitrogen, which is used for fertilizer, but nitrogen's cheap. And so we finally figured out a way to scrub the air inside of chicken houses. And so we've developed this indoor air scrubber, and we've just tested it, and it works really good. It reduces ammonia by 87 to 99%, depending on how high the ammonia is and how fast we're flowing air through the scrubber. But I'm really excited about that. And right now we're looking for integrators or growers that want to try this in Northwest Arkansas, so we can try it in poultry houses. We tried it in our shop, and we had anhydrous ammonia. We looked at 10, 25, 50, 75, and 100 parts per million, and it did a really great job of scrubbing that ammonia. So the next step is to go into poultry houses, and I can't wait to do that. It's something. It possibly could replace litter amendments in the future. I think it may be more cost effective than litter amendments in reducing ammonia.
I guess, the questions too would be the capacity, the cubic volume, the air speeds, particularly with big chicken houses. You got a lot of air coming through these houses, and do you have a long enough time to accommodate that volume?
That's exactly right. We're scrubbing it at 5,500 CFM, and so you could exchange all the air in a 40 by 400 house in about 30 minutes. And so this is mainly for the first 2-3 weeks of the grow out when there's low ventilation in those houses. And, that's when you have, especially in the wintertime, when you have the really high ammonia levels. We measured ammonia in chicken houses that was untreated with, no kind of litter amendment. And the average annual concentration was like 25.1 parts per million. Well, in the summer, it's dead low when you have a lot of ventilation, and the winter, it got really high, especially when those birds are really young. And it would be, 90 or 100 parts per million at times. And so this thing does a tremendous job of reducing that ammonia to dead low levels, so they'll still have to ventilate to get rid of CO2 and moisture and everything. But it's going to get rid of the ammonia for first several weeks. In fact, during the winter, sometimes you have low ventilation going on up to 4 or 5 weeks. It's relatively high ammonia. And so it won't be able to scrub all of that air, but it'll be able to scrub a fourth or half of that air. And so it's one of these things we won't know how it's going to pan out, the economics, until we actually do it. So, but our national program, I'm in the 212 national program for ARS, and they're real excited about it. And we're doing our 5-year plan now, and they wanted to immediately put these scrubbers out all over the country and test it. And I'm like, hold on, let's wait. Let's test it in a chicken house first in Fayetteville or somewhere near Fayetteville, because when you first do something, there's going to be problems. And I want to be babysitting that things when the problems arise and see if we can solve those and everything before we have this thing all over the country. But it's very exciting right now. It's an exciting time where, there could be a scrubber in every chicken house in America, and then it may be where it falls flat on its face as soon as we get in a chicken house. It's why we do research.
Is there any hope for pathogen containment, being a veterinarian like I am?
Well, yeah, that's the big thing. And we think, the way it works, it has these tiny droplets. They're like 100 microns, and they hit an ammonia molecule and its collision, how it takes it out. And so, the pathogens are even bigger than ammonia. They're like a micron, and the bacteria are 10 microns or whatever. In the dust, we're wanting to take out dust too, are 2 to 10 or bigger microns. And so all of those are going to be taken out by collision. So we're going to be working with a bunch of microbiologists. I'm not a microbiologist that measures Campylobacter, Salmonella, and then the viruses, all the different viruses that they can look at, that they can measure. And there's several ARS scientists that are going to work with me on that to get us set up. And we've already been given some of these things that catch airborne pathogens, so we'll be able to catch it. What we want to do is have a treated house where we've got the scrubber and an untreated house. And then we're measuring the airborne pathogens in both of those houses to see how good it reduces it. It'll be interesting. Early on, I think we can have a big reduction, when there's not that much ventilation going on in the out of the house. But it's just, we got to do the research to see what we get.
That's exciting, Philip. This is, again, good news and needed by industry. Like you say, it may not be applicable to the large commercial application, but at least there's hope and there's work in this area of needed help. I think particularly this era of high-path AI and even metapneumovirus, some of the, the viruses that seem to be increased of late, more so than just environmental chemistry. That's always been with us. It's this new day, we need more help. This is a good help.
It's time for our famous 3.
A healthy gut leads to healthy chicks. That's where Poultry Star comes in. Poultry Star is a symbiotic, meaning it has both a probiotic and a prebiotic, and it contains live, metabolically active lactic acid bacteria that were isolated from the intestines of healthy birds, not the soil like most competitive products. When you think gut health, think Poultry Star. Learn more at dsm-firmenich.com/poultrystar.
Well, Philip, it's been so much fun talking with you this morning and get to know a little bit more about you've been around longer than I have, which is amazing, and and a great track record. So folks at WiseNetics appreciate your participation in Poultry Podcast. And if you'll hang on, we can do 3 questions I didn't let you prep for.
Okay.
But the first question is, any professional reference or book or something that you use pretty regularly, what you lean on? What's your Bible of environmental chemistry control?
Well, I read and I publish a lot in the Journal of Environmental Quality. I think that's a very good journal. And, I think, I guess it's part of that is getting my PhD in a marine science department. The environment was very important, water quality and everything is very important. So I really like that journal and read it a lot and publish a lot in there. A lot of my publications are in there.
This is more of a personal question. So any personal books or things that you would say would be top of the list that impact you non-professionally, maybe?
I'm trying to think.
You're a well-thought man.
That's a tough one. I wanted to be a writer myself growing up. And my dad sat me down one time when I told him I was going to major in English and try to write novels. And he said, son, you can do your writing at night and on weekends. You need to major in something where you're going to make money for your family. And so I've been trying to write a novel that takes place on the Amazon for literally decades now. And it's, when that's not your full-time job, it gets put on the back burner. So I've never finished that. So
have you been to Amazon quite a bit?
I have. When I finished college, I spent a month on the Amazon. We got a boat in Manaus and we went 800 miles upriver, and I was doing research for the novel. I was writing the whole way and everything. It was quite an adventure. We had piranha for lunch and supper every day. They're kind of like crappie. They're good tasting and they're easy to catch as long as you have a wire leader, on your.
What about peacock bass? You get any of those?
I never caught one peacock bass. I was a little frustrated on that. One of the interesting things I saw was pink dolphins we had a Warani Indian with us on the ship, and he couldn't speak any English or Portuguese, and he made a thing like, "Do you want to go fishing?" And I said, "Yeah." And so we had his dugout canoe with, and he was like, "Take your camera." And so I had my camera. We were paddling in this flooded forest, and there were pink dolphin in there. There's a freshwater dolphin, and he carried a machete everywhere. And he pulled his machete out and he started slicing through the water, and all these pink dolphins jumped at once. And I didn't know that was going to happen. And I missed the shot. I didn't get it, and he's looking at me like, "You dummy, you missed that." But no, it was a great trip though, and wrote a lot, but like I said, never finished that book.
Great. And one more question as counsel to the next generation, how to be successful in your area of work or of interest. What would you tell the young folks that are coming up?
Well, I think for people need to be patient. A lot of times they just don't have the patience to stick with something, and if you have an idea on something and people start telling you all the reasons it won't work, you need to be hard-headed sometimes and just plow on. Because when we first started the alum research, so many people said so many reasons why that wouldn't work, and I was just, hard-headed enough to where I said, okay, I'm going to try it anyway and see what happens. And it really worked out.
That's good. That's fair.